Hey, welcome to a special episode of And Now for Something Completely Machinima, the podcast about machinima, virtual production, and related technologies. So, almost all of us that are involved with this show, all of us really, have been involved with this art form, observing it, commenting on it, making it for a long time, like a couple decades, I think it is now. So, and over the course of those years, we have come across a number of just startlingly good pieces of work. And this is going back 15 years now, in 2007, 2008 or so. Basically, Ricky and some fellow friends in the machinima community came up with an idea of, so you figure 2007, 2008, this is the early days of YouTube. YouTube wasn't the, let's say, top tier platform that it is now. We all kind of knew it was gonna be eventually, but it was clunky. There were upload limits, and in order to keep under those limits, you had to upload at very low quality. And then the commenting community on YouTube was really, really Wild West. And then of course they're trying to figure out how to make money. So there's ads and all these things that just made the viewing experience unpleasant. And it was Ricky who first stepped forward and said, we need a better solution. This content, these good films deserve a better way to view them than that. That's really how this all started. So they came up with a site called Machiniplex. Now, of course, again, it's been 15 years ago. Several years worth of films were accrued with the Machiniplex collection. And then ultimately it just wasn't financially feasible to keep that running. Interest in machinima kind of had a drought period, and it waned. We see kind of the cusp of revival of it now. So when we shut down that website, by the time that it was time to close that down, I'd been involved with it as well with my podcast called The Overcast. We had interviewed filmmakers and done premieres for their films and Second Life and things like that. So it was time to take the website down, and we had this archive of all those films. They were relatively low resolution by today's standards, but they were good renders. So I just archived them away, and they've been sitting in, file storage for these many years. So this year, 2023, we have taken it upon ourselves a project to bring those, dust off that box and pull up those virtual VHS tapes of those classics and bring them back to life. So the process that I've undertaken here is taking all those original renders, AI upscaling them to 1080p, and then putting them onto Vimeo for kind of long-term preservation. So we have created a showcase on Vimeo, which there will be a URL in the description. I'm not going to read it because it's not a particularly pretty URL or easy to remember. But it'll either be, if it's not on screen right now, it'll be in the description of this video. But this showcase has about right around 30 films from that era. And these stretch from the very, very early days of machinima, when they weren't even called that. It was Quake movies. So 1997, 96 even, I think, is the earliest film. All the way up through about 2008. These are, I think widely considered, or were at the time widely considered to be the creme de la creme. Really, really good stuff. And so we're basically wanting to put those out there to remind people. I think sometimes when people watch this show and they hear us giving criticism to current machinima, a question that might come to their mind is, well, what are you even comparing this to? If you go out on YouTube, this is better than most of the stuff that people are just throwing together on YouTube. Yeah, but we've seen this stuff. And these pieces of a variety of types, everything from comedy to action to drama. There's a love story. There's some that are just art for art's sake. There's some that are poetic. There's some that are adaptations of old stories from literature. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. This is what we compare it to. In our memories, we've seen this stuff when really machinima was at its first peak, in my opinion. And these films, a lot of them really, really hold up well even today. Like you'd be hard pressed to create something as beautiful as some of these are, even with all the improvements that have been in game engines and the tools that are now readily at our disposal that were not so at our disposal back when these were made. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to quickly mention, we've each picked one of those 30 films as kind of our first pick of, here's one that I want to call some attention to. We'd encourage you to watch all of them when you get a chance. We think you'll like them all, but these are the 4 that we picked. We may do this again and maybe a few more times to call some more attention to these films. So I've been blabbing a lot here, but I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. The film that I'm picking is one of the earliest machinima films ever done. This was made in Quake 1. It's called Blahbalicious. And it is a kind of slightly absurdist comedy anthology of sorts. I don't know if I'm using the proper term for it, but it's not narrative driven, that's for sure. It's not just one story. It's segments of stories and kind of visual themes that get revisited. Most of which is intended to have let's say a gamer's type of comedy in mind. It's not sophisticated humor for the most part. It's a lot of physical comedy. Anyway, when I saw this film, it would have been in 1996 or 1997. I was just absolutely enthralled and inspired. I don't think I would have gotten into making machinima were it not for having seen this, because it mixed this element of silly and funny and absurdity that is at the heart of a lot of where my sense of humor really thrives. So that's my pick is Blahbalicious. It was made by 2 guys that I don't know very much about. They went by the names of Avatar and Wendigo. And Tracy, was that team, were they mentioned in the machinima book that you wrote? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen Tracy's machinima book, check it out. It is on Amazon. We've got a link on our website, and we'll make sure to include it here as well. But these guys are from machinima history, and they didn't start a channel or make a whole bunch of films or anything like that. They were active for a short period. I suspect when they were college students, but I'm not sure. And then they've moved on with their lives. But this film has just stood the test of time for me personally, and I think for a lot of people who see it, it's just got a very old school, original machinima type of quality to it. And yeah, so that's my pick, Blahbalicious.
It's a real treat to watch these films again, Phil, and thank you so much for remastering them, because
thank you.
It's made them really, really fresh again. And you know what, this particular one, just watching this again, which by the way, the Wendigo and Avatar, that's these are characters called Brian Hess and Mackie McCandish, and it was originally released in 1997. Okay. So it goes back a long way. But when I looked at this again, having not seen this for years and years and years, you know what? It's got lots of 90s references in it of yoga and workouts and Braveheart and suits for work and discos and politically incorrect references to fatness. I loved it. It's great. So it's a really good pick. Thank you.
I want to emphasize and reiterate Phil's comment about the film being inspiring. That was one thing with the community of machinima, the early community, was that brought everybody together, is that they created films that inspired them to either react to the film or create their own film. Every single one of these films would I think you can consider to be an inspiration. And that leads me to my choice for a film, which is Bot by Digital Yoke Productions. Now, I could pick any one of these 30 films and talk about it as a favorite, but I wanted to recommend Bot because it was a film that came and went very quickly. In fact, I would venture to say that 99% of the people listening don't even remember this film. And the fellow that made it, and God, even with research, I can't remember the name of the person who made the film. It was a guy, and I corresponded with him. He was a game developer and was involved in the game industry. And he made, this is, as far as I know, this only single film. And I wanted people to know about it and to watch it. Now, the quality of the film when it was initially released was fantastic, but the copies that we've had down through the ages, even with Phil's AI upscaling, still has a little bit of an issue. So try to imagine it when you watch the film of it being a bit higher quality, but it's essentially, it's a kind of science fiction story centered around robots and sentience. And there's almost a Orwell's 1984 feeling to it, in which you have this overlord controlling these fighting robots, and they're all in a manufactured line. And until one day, one of the robots stops and turns around to look at where they've come from. And this starts a whole story of this robot's sad and funny journey through being aware of what's going on to them, what's happening to them, and how they've been treated in this manufactured world. And so you follow this robot in trying to escape the world to the outdoors. And I won't spoil it by telling you what happens at the end, but it produces a feeling. It produced a feeling in me when I first saw it that was very emotional, because I had such a strong empathy with the central robot. The robot, everything is very simple, but the camera work in it, especially for the title sequence, it winds around this sort of mechanistic structure with the titles and names being woven into the structure of the thing that the 3D camera is moving around. And the scale and the epic quality reminded me of Fritz Lang at some points, where you have this massive, that's one of the cool things about science fiction theater. You get this massive epic scale of the small person and the huge environment they're in. And the best thing about it was that the early days of machinima, it was hard to create, but because humor was the driving force behind a great deal of modern. Blahbalicious is a perfect example of it, although it's a cut above many of the other films, because that was the easiest thing that you could do and that people could understand quickly. Well, Bot tried to do something different. It tried to bring a real drama that created an emotional reaction in viewers. And now we see that all the time. But in those early days, that kind of film wasn't around very much. And for that reason, when I rewatched it again, I experienced the same emotional reaction to it, which told me this is the film that I need to recommend to everyone. So that's my pick on it. Again, they're out of the 30, you could pick any number of them, but Bot by Digital Yoke, I think, would be well worth your time.
Mm. And it was made in Unreal Tournament, I believe, using.
Yes, thank you for mentioning it. Yeah.
As I understand it, it was also the runner-up to, I think, the non-interactive section of the Make Something Unreal contest in 2005. Although I don't know exactly when this would have been made, but my guess would be 2003, 2004-ish, I would have thought.
That's my guess, yes.
Mm. It's
yeah,
interesting.
I would venture to say that, okay, 99% of the people haven't heard of it or haven't seen this film. I would say 97% of you maybe have never even heard of it. it really was one that it came and went, and for a long period of time, it was not available, not easily available to see. This is pre-YouTube years, so it wasn't streaming anywhere or anything like that, and it was a hard to find gem that people in the community knew about because it had gotten this attention with the award and stuff. But I mean, it was many years after it was made before I ever got to see it for the first time. So yeah, it's going to be nice to have it available to see now.
Yep.
There is one thing I will say. I actually think that the AI has perhaps done this a favor, because although it does look a little bit dated, the story is stunning. And the AI has given it really quite a contemporary feel as well. And, you know, if you look at a lot of the aesthetics that you see, where you've got, you know, animated AI, you know, productions, it looks very similar to that. And it's got that kind of feel to it. So maybe it will resonate with audiences in a way that it maybe never did over the years, because otherwise one would assume it would have been out on the channels. There is another thing I'll say. I think I'm correct in saying this, and forgive me if I'm not, but I understand that the composer who created the original score to this, Gian Piero Scuderi, passed away last year, which is really sad to have discovered, given that this is now being re-released.
Beautiful score.
It's a gorgeous score to it. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to admit now that this is the first time I've seen this film, and it does hold up. Because of the AI upscaling, it does not look like a film that's made a long time ago. It looks like, for me, because I was watching it fresh, completely new, I thought it held up really nicely compared to some of the other more recent films that we've discussed over the course of the show.
Oh, that's good.
And I really enjoyed watching it as well. So there's a couple of others that are on the list which I haven't seen yet, ever. So I'm looking forward to diving in and.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Good.
By the way, one quick clarification. The person who came up with the idea for Machiniplex was Jason Choi, who has a film that he did in World of Warcraft, which I think is your choice, Damien, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about him, but he came up with the original idea, and he approached me and Ingrid Moon to put it together, and we jumped into it. And but he was the person who came up with the first idea.
Wasn't it that? Yeah, Ricky, wasn't it that he came up with it, and then it was you three, and wasn't that right around the time when he got hired by the game developer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so then it became a thing of, well, he just didn't have time for that anymore to do it. And so you guys took it from there, and then
we took it over.
At some point, you brought me in to be part of it too. So yeah, I'd forgotten that it was originally Jason's. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Sure.
Well, since we're talking about him, I might as well talk about his film. Edge of Remorse by Jason Choi. At the time, I'd seen lots of machinima, and most of it was comedy based. So I'd laughed a lot of these films I'd seen. This was one of the first ones I ever saw that produced an emotional reaction that was not laughter. Because it's not a funny film. It's a very serious, emotional film, and it provoked those kind of emotions in me as I watched it. And it's made with World of Warcraft, which it's not a game I'm that familiar with, but you don't need to be to understand this story.
Absolutely.
There's no dialogue. Ricky, I believe you did the sound work for it.
I designed the sound, yes.
You did an excellent job with that.
Thank you.
The story is very easy to understand what's going on between the two characters, and the way it edits the sort of flashback when the characters were kids and how they're adults. But also, some of the characters switch between having armor on and some they're just normal clothes. You can still tell they're the same character. Sometimes with early machinima films, if a character changes their outfit, they're not easy to recognize because it changes. The outfit was the main way of doing it, but for this film, you know, and I think that's an important distinction there. But it's just so well crafted, and it made me feel things that a machinima film had not done before. And watching it again, it brought those same feelings back that I experienced then, and some more, because obviously I've had more life experiences and I understand things better, I had even more of an emotional reaction watching it again recently. So this is going to be my pick for the show. And I remember thinking back then, if Jason can make a film that makes people feel things, I want to be able to do that as well.
Yeah.
And it's something to learn from and be inspired by.
Yes.
And every time I was writing a script after watching it, I would remember this film, and I hope that I was able to learn some things from Jason in my own work.
A quick making of note that I'll mention on Edge of Remorse is, so there was a lot of limitations on what kinds of animations and poses that you could get characters in World of Warcraft to do within the game. Kind of comically limiting number of poses, in fact, that Ricky and I used to joke about, that there's basically this and this. You know, that's the two poses, is this. Jason was well aware of this, but he really liked the aesthetic of the game, but wanted to have animations that, like you said, Damien, that weren't going to just provoke laughter. That was a huge concern of his with this, is if I'm going to do this, I don't want someone laughing at this story, you know? And so the solution he ended up coming up with was, there was a tool that was around then where you could load up one of the characters from World of Warcraft and pose them, just to basically kind of look at the character from different angles. And I don't remember what the name of the thing was. It doesn't really matter, but it was still pose type stuff. So he made extensive use of that tool and compositing, which he's a masterful compositor, just seamless, beautiful. And but he used that tool to get some of those poses that would have been next to impossible to pull off with actual gameplay. So I'm pretty sure that most of this film, even though it's completely made with World of Warcraft assets and technically with World of Warcraft rendering, I don't think there's any gameplay involved with this film at all, because he wanted a level of precision with what would show up on screen and where, that the game just wouldn't have offered. And yet you look at it, and if you played World of Warcraft, probably most people who'd come at it from that point of view would go, how did he do this? You know, well, that's how.
And
masterful choice that I don't think I saw anyone else do. They probably did after this, but I never saw anyone before him think to use the tools in that way to get it done. It's a very Tom Jantel kind of move, you know, that just whatever works, that's what I'm going to do. That's what he did here. It's beautiful.
There's no artifacts from the compositing. Like sometimes you see like a black line around a character.
Yeah.
There's none of that in this film.
No,
and
he's
I
very, very good at
completely
what he does.
forgotten that until you said it, because when I watched it again for this, I just assumed he made it in the game. I did not.
Yeah, it's flawless. Yeah.
And hence why he won Best Visual Design at the Machinima Festival that year, November 2006.
Wasn't this film also in a World of Warcraft specific contest by Blizzard as well? Because it was.
Yeah, I think it was, but I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, there's an official World of Warcraft Machinima contest of some kind.
And that's completely escaped me, but yes, you're right.
Well, I owe Jason Choi a big thank you, because he was the person who opened the door to Machinima for me on the original forums at machinima.com before it became the YouTube machinima.com. He had a forum post that said, I'm looking for actors and sound people to do a machinima, and I had some time, and so I answered it, and he was local, so we got together at a deli and sat down, and I liked him a lot, so we started working on what became Only the Strong Survive. I did the sound and acted in that, and then he called me back to do Edge of Remorse, sound for Edge of Remorse. Now Jason was, and I imagine still is, a very detail-oriented person and a demanding director. He's not one of those people that would just, let's get it done and move on to the next thing. He wanted it to be just right. So I had a bit of a hard time with him for a while, because I thought I was really talented as a sound designer, because I had done sound design for the stage, but I had never done cinematic sound design. So Only the Strong Survived was quite a learning process, and I had grown quite a bit. So I would submit sound passes on certain scenes, and he would say, "No, that's not right." And he'd give me specific notes, and I was thinking, "Well, that's just crazy. That makes sense. That it's perfect." But I said, "He's the director, you know." So I'd go back and change it, and every single time he was right. It made the scene better. It fixed things. It added more subtlety to it, blending the orchestral score in a way. I learned some of the elements of basic sound mastery and mixing, working with Jason on that, because he already had a great sense of it. So he taught me a lot of that stuff, maybe not necessarily the technical elements, but from a director's point of view, how to make things work better. So that film has a lot of meaning to me. Quite a few of those scenes were exacting and took hours and hours and hours to get it together. But I thank him for all of that, because it made the film better and it made me better as an artist. I was sorry that the machinima community lost him in a way, because it very much like the brain drain that occurred. But when many major machinima talents went on to professional work in the game industry, and hey, I can understand that. I mean, you got to make a living, and that's the best way to do it. You don't make a lot of money doing machinima, if at all. But I was sorry to see his influence move out of machinima, because he had the ability to become a towering talent and influence in machinima. And just a couple films that he did are very, very strong, and really like your pick, Jason. It's really good. I mean, Damien, thank you.
Incidentally, Only the Strong Survive, the film that's pivotal in Ricky's story and getting his start, is also part of this collection. So,
Yeah. My pick is the Snow Witch, which was created by Britannica Dreams, originally released in 2006.
What a film.
Yeah, having been made in the October in Sims 2. And I believe both you and Phil worked on this film, actually. Ricky, I think you were on audio production, and Phil, I think, was the witch's voice, I believe. Anyway, well, that's what the credits say. And I'm sure.
I think basically Ricky pulled me in for an effect thing. I don't think I'm the actual voice of the voiceover, but he was trying to achieve a certain effect on the witch's voice and couldn't figure it out. And between the two of us, we did. I didn't even realize I was credited on the film. It's a very
You're right.
part of the
Yes,
thing. It's 99% Ricky for sure.
Fair enough. Well, okay, so for those of you that don't know this is a Japanese ghost story adapted from Hearn's Kwaidan. It's the story of these two woodcutters, an old man and his young apprentice, Minokichi. One of whom gets trapped in a snowstorm, and they're in a forest, and they take refuge in this hut, during which they make a bargain, which later has some really serious consequences for them. It's an absolutely beautiful fairy tale, traditional sort of fairy tale, and it was actually one of the most compelling machinimas that I'd seen. You know, up to the point when I actually remember this being selected for the 2007 festival in Europe that I directed. The remastering, yes, it brings the graphics up to date, but it's still a little glitchy. But none of that takes away from what an incredible piece of work this actually is. And the thing that I think stood out for me on this was the narration, this beautiful lyrical voice of Simon Taylor, who I've no idea what happened to him. I don't know what he went on and did, if he continued to work in acting or whatever. I've no idea. But the thing that I particularly remember about it, and why it's a particular choice for me, is because it's you know, this is a film that the BBC became particularly interested in as something that demonstrated as a creative form, machinima, in the creative form that showed the potential of what you could do with archival material and how it might be repurposed, and how a community might be brought together to celebrate the archival material. And it was one that really attracted their attention, although I think, to my knowledge, nothing ever actually came of it in the end, which is a real shame, because the one thing that I do remember seeing, which we've mentioned Tom before in this episode, but Tom Jantle took one of Chaplin's old BBC films, The Kid, in fact, and created a machinima story with it in a way that only Tom could. But this to me was one of those sort of ground marker kind of beautifully told machinima stories that moved away from the original kind of laddish humor that you got with the likes of the Rooster Teeth, Halo sort of stories. It was wonderfully made. I loved it.
I had a pretty good friendship going with Michelle, particularly when she was part of the machinima community. And this is one of the films that made me pick up The Sims 2 as a machinima tool for a while. And because I'd watched it and I thought, this is so unlike the actual game. And I wasn't really interested in telling stories that the game itself would do. I wanted to do sort of science fiction stuff, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone that knows me. But when I saw this, and because it's so different from the standard modern day sort of lifestyle stuff from the game, that's what inspired me to pick up the game. And I talked to her a lot about how she did it, and she was telling me about all the mods that she found and the mod sites that existed for the game. And she actually found me some sort of sci-fi stuff and said, hey, check this out, and I ended up using that in my project. So this is one of those films that like Edge of Remorse offered me a lot of inspiration for my own work, and I'm glad to see it back. And I watched it again. It brought back a lot of memories, and I was going to choose it on that ground, but Tracy, you beat me to it.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I still got to say that, which is the important thing. So I'm glad it's here on the upscale and everything, and I think it still holds up. I know there's some glitches with the upscaling process. It doesn't matter. It still looks great. It's still a good film, and I miss Michelle's creativity, because she created a number of really good films.
Yeah,
Yeah,
her and the co-director that she worked with for a number of years under that Britannica Dreams label. Her name is eluding me now. I can't remember. Started with a letter A, I believe. But the two of them, they, in this world of, gamer humor and I mean the kind of stuff that I was making, male restroom etiquette and stuff. I mean, just sophomoric humor. These two were just undeterred, making beautiful and unashamedly woman-made machinima. Like just the most gorgeous sets, and the just such attention to detail on costuming and hairstyling and elements that, frankly, guys are pretty much idiots about most of the time, and they were just, so that the level of detail of what they would do, I wish that more of their work was out there. But this is, and I hope that she would agree too, and not be upset that I say this is definitely the best. They did lots of good work, but this is, if you needed to see just one film to get a sense of what Britannica Dreams and Michelle, what they were about and what they did, this was kind of a pinnacle for them, really. I think it was the right combination of, this kind of a classic story, a story that's not overly sentimental, right? And they're
Yes.
some of the other, I think some of the other subject matter that they chose was more of a traditional Western sentimentality thing, which is fine. There's an audience for that. But this, I think, because of its roots in Japanese culture, there's just not that much of an element of that woven into the fabric of the story. To me, that makes it just magical. And then just visually, it's yeah. Even though this is one of the films that I think most disappointed on how well the upscaling did. There's just limits to what these stupid computers can do. But
Yeah.
Anyway, nonetheless, wonderful story, and the sound is just terrific. I mean, it's great. So it's one of my all-time favorites. It was extremely inspirational to me as well, Damien. And Michelle was always so generous when I would ask questions about the same thing as you, trying to get the most out of The Sims 2.
Yeah.
She was always so polite and so responsive, and I keep in touch with her and Frank on a limited basis nowadays, and they're still doing well. So
Oh, that's great.
And the co-director was somebody called Kerry Battelle. Kerry Battelle.
Kerry. Why did I think it started with A?
Khera. Kerry.
Kerry.
Kheri.
Okay.
Battelle.
Yeah, that makes sense. That rings right. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's a milestone film. And I'd like to remind listeners that when you go to put your imagination back at a time in which machinima was thousands and thousands of people were interested in it, and we were all inspired by somebody who took a step forward. So you have all of this, as Phil points out, this sort of humorous, semi-romantic, goofy kind of films made with The Sims, and then suddenly this film comes out, and it's like a classic Disney animation. You know what I mean? Everything is flawless. It's a beautiful story. The music, the narration is just perfect. And everybody was just stunned by how great this film was. And it inspired everybody because it showed you what could be done. And that's what we were all waiting for. We were waiting for the next person to show us what you could do with this game or what you could do with that game. And that was exciting. And it is still exciting today to think about that, although Machinima is in a different place. More so than any other film I've ever worked on as a sound designer, this one was a real creative experience for me because I had strong emotional reactions to different scenes and different environments. And I would try out literally dozens of layered sound effects to create the sound effect of snow, of certain types of winds in and outside. And it became such an obsession to me that I would dream about the sound, you know. So for me, working on this project was a creative act, unlike simply doing a craft job. And I was really proud that Michelle felt so good about the sound design and how it blended in with her. Then that's what I wanted. I didn't want the sound to stand out. I wanted it to be part of the story, that it evoked the story. And I think it did that. So it's a great choice. And if any film you want to choose out of the 30, you watch this one, it would be a great choice. It's a really, really good film. And the original Quaidon series of stories by Lafcadio Hearn is a great source. I don't know why more machinima filmmakers don't draw from these sorts of sources, because they're perfect for machinima.
Yeah.
So we've got a collection now that's ready to go of about 30 of films that are of, as you can see from just our 4 picks there couldn't be more 4 completely different, approaches to storytelling / filmmaking. And as you go into the collection, there's even more variety. They're of every genre you could think of, I think. So I hope that you all enjoy it. We are going to put the link to that out there. We're going to start promoting it. I'm going to be working on a kind of a trailer of sorts that I hope will give like a brief glimpse of all 30 films. Get that out there. But we want people to know about these. This is and it's an important part of the history of this, and these can be a source of inspiration if you're someone who doesn't just like hearing about machinima, but actually likes making it or aspires to make it. I think a lot of the people who listen here are involved in some kind of creative production of some kind. These are a great source of inspiration to see. To me, this is like, it's like going back and listening to Led Zeppelin 1. and remembering that at the time they had an 8-track recorder. And to see what Jimmy Page and his engineer did with 8 tracks, it's astounding. In a similar sense, this is when we had a lot less to work with. It was a lot more just elbow grease and skin of your teeth and figure something out. There were no games with built-in machinima tools. There was no such thing, you know. And so to me, it's inspirational for that reason. And I think even if you're just getting started, these could be inspirational for that reason. That we're going to mention Tom Jantel again, but it's because he for so long proclaimed just how important it is to just open your mind and focus on what you want to convey and just find the way to do it. Don't listen to any preset rules. Don't stay within the confines of one tool. It's like tying your hands. He's so right. He's so right. So this collection is just a really beautiful selection of films that demonstrate people who did that, who pulled in friends with the right skills and figured out how to make their films. I don't think any of these are fully solo efforts. It was all about people working together and leveraging the strengths of friends and the support of each other too.
Yes.
So that's the machinima community we remember and that we encourage even today. Even though it looks different, but that's still, the principles are still the same. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see if we feel like revisiting and highlighting a few more of these films at another time. But check out the whole collection. The link will be in the description or on the screen here. And thanks for joining us. I'm Phil. This is Ricky, Tracy, and Damien. And thanks for tuning in. See you next time.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.